Chapter 7. The Criminal. Those who have had no experience in the courts, and no knowledge of what is known as the criminal class, have a general idea that a criminal is not like other men. The people they know are law-abiding, conventional believers in the state and the church and all social customs and relations. They have strict ideas of property rights, and regard the law as sacred. True, they have no more acquaintance with law-makers and politicians in general than with the criminal class, which, of course, is one reason why they have such unbounded confidence in the law. Such persons are surprised and shocked when some member of the family or some friend is entangled in the courts, and generally regard it as a catastrophe that has come upon him by accident or a terrible mistake. As a rule, they do all in their power to help him, whether he is acquitted or convicted. They never think that he, and everyone else they know, is not materially different from the ordinary criminal. As a matter of fact, the potential criminal is in every man, and no one was ever so abandoned that some friend would not plead for him, or that someone who knew him would not testify to his good deeds. The criminal is not hard to understand. He is one who, from inherited defects or from great misfortune or especially hard circumstances, is not able to make the necessary adjustments to fit him to his environment. Seldom is he a man of average intelligence, unless he belongs to a certain class that will be discussed later. Almost always he is below the normal of intelligence, and in perhaps half of the cases very much below. Nearly always he is a person of practically no education and no property. One who has given attention to the subject of crime knows exactly where the criminal comes from and how he will develop. The crimes of violence and murder, and the lesser crimes against property, practically all come from those who have been reared in the poor and congested districts of cities and large villages. The robbers, burglars, pickpockets, and thieves are from these surroundings. In a broad sense, some criminals are born and some are made. Nearly all of them are both born and made. This does not mean that criminality can be inherited, or even that there is a criminal type. It means that with certain physical and mental imperfections, and with certain environment, the criminal will be the result. Seldom does one begin a criminal life as a full-grown man. The origin of the typical criminal is an imperfect child, suffering from some defect. Usually he was born with a weak intellect, or an unstable nervous system. He comes from poor parents. Often one or both of these died or met misfortune while he was young. He comes from the crowded part of a poor district. He has had little chance to go to school, and could not have been a scholar, no matter how regularly he attended school. Some useful things he could have learned, had society furnished the right teachers, surroundings, and opportunities to make the most of an imperfect child. Early in life he does some desultory work in casual occupations. This, of course, is not steady, but he picks up what he can and keeps the job for a short time, sometimes quitting work because he is discharged, and sometimes because, like most boys and men, he does not like to work. His playground is the street, the railroad yards, or vacant lots too small for real play, and fit only for a loafing place for boys like himself. These gather nightly, and talk of the incidents that interest most people, mainly the abnormal things of life, and generally the crimes that the newspapers make so prominent to satisfy the public demand. He learns to go into vacant buildings, steals the plumbing, and he early learns where to sell it. From this it is only a short step to visiting occupied buildings at night. In this way he learns to be a burglar, as other boys learn to play baseball or golf. Naturally, he has no strong sense of property rights. He has always had a hard time to get enough to eat and wear, and he has grown up unconsciously to see the inequality of distribution, and to believe that it is not fair, and that there is little or no justice in the world. As a child, he learned to get things the best way he could, and to think nothing about it. In short, his life, like all other lives, moves along the lines of least resistance. He soon comes to feel that the police are his natural enemies, and his chief business is to keep from getting caught. Inevitably he is brought into the juvenile court. He may be reprimanded at first. He comes again, and is placed on probation. The next time he goes to a juvenile prison, where he can learn all the things he has not found out before. He is known to the police, known to the court, known to the neighbours. His status is fixed. When released from prison, he takes his old heredity back into his old environment. It is the easiest to him, for he has learned to make his adjustments to this environment. From 15 to 25 years of age, he has the added burden of adolescence, the trying time in a boy's life when sex feelings are developing, when he is passing from childhood to manhood. This is a very difficult time, at best, to the type of boy from which a criminal grows. He meets it without preparation or instruction. What he knows he learns from others like himself. He gets weird, fantastic, neurotic ideas, which only add to his natural wonderment. Every person who has not inherited property must live by some trade or calling. Very few people, in jail or out, choose their profession. Even if one selects his profession, it does not follow that he has chosen the calling for which he is best adapted. So far as a person can and does follow his desires, he generally means to choose the calling which will bring him the greatest amount of return for the least exertion. He may have strong inclinations in certain directions, as for instance to paint or to write, or to investigate, or to philosophize. But as a rule he does not make his living from following these ambitions. If he does, it is generally a poor living, but usually his aim is to make money at something else, so that he can give some free rein to his real ambitions. Most men start to make a living as boys from the age of 15 to 18. They have no idea of what they ought to do, or even of what they want to do. Usually, so far as they have an ambition, it is to do something more or less spectacular, that seems to have an element of adventure, and not too disagreeable or hard. Something like the work of a policeman, a chauffeur, or an employee in a garage. Still, first and last, most boys and most men have no opportunity for choosing an occupation. In fact, the boy is told that he is a man and must get a job long before he knows that he is a man, or begins to feel responsibilities, while he still has all the emotions and dreams of a boy. When he is told he must go to work, he looks for a job. He does not wait until he can find the one that fits him. He cannot afford to wait, and if he could, he does not know what job would fit. He takes automatically the first place he can get, hoping to find a better one, which generally means an easier one, before very long. It is hard for a boy to stick to work. Too many things are calling him away. Every instinct and emotion is urging him to play. New feelings and desires are coaxing him from work. His companions and the boy life in which he has a place urge him to leave his task. Usually he keeps his job no longer than he can help, and later looks for something else. The chances are great that he will never find what he wants, that he has not had the preparation or training for a successful working man's career, whatever that might be. He is a doer of odd jobs and of poorly paid work all his life. He must have some calling, and takes the easiest one, which is often a life of crime. From this start comes the professional criminal, so called. He may make a business of picking pockets. If this comes to be his trade, it is very hard for him to give it up. There is so strong an element of chance. He never knows what a pocket will contain. It gratifies a spirit of adventure. Then it is easy. The wages are much greater than he could get in any other calling. The hours are short, and it never interferes with his amusements. It is not so dangerous as being a burglar or a switchman, for he can find an excuse for jostling one in the street cars or in a crowd, and thus reaching into a pocket. The burglar is not so apt to be a professional. His is a bolder and more hazardous trade. If he is caught, he he is taken from his occupation for a longer time. The great hazard involved in this trade, and also the physical strength and fitness of those who follow it, lead to its abandonment more frequently than is the case with a pickpocket or a petty thief. Robbery is seldom a profession. It is usually the crime of the young and venturesome, and almost surely leads to early disaster. Murder, of course, is never a profession. In a broad way it is the result of accident or passion, or of relations which are too hard to endure. In prison and out I have talked with scores of these men and boys. I am sure they rarely tried to deceive me. I have very seldom seen one who felt that he had done wrong, or had any thought of what the world calls reformation. A very few have used the current language of those who talk of reform, but generally they were the weakest and most hopeless of the lot, and usually adopted this attitude to deceive. In almost every instance where you meet any sign of intelligence, excuses and explanations are freely made, and these explanations fully justify their points of view. Often, too, they tell you in sincerity that they believe their way of life is too hard and does not pay, that while they cannot see how they could have done any differently in the past, they believe their experience has taught them to stick by the rules of the game. The boy delinquent grows naturally and almost inevitably into the man criminal. He has generally never learned a trade. No habits have been formed in his youth to keep him from crime. A life of crime is the only one open to him, and for this life he has had ample experience, inclination, and opportunity. Then, too, for this kind of young man, the life of a criminal has a strong appeal. Life without opportunity, and without a gambler's chance to win a considerable prize, is not attractive to anyone. The conventional man who devotes his life to business or to a profession always has before him the prizes of success. To some, honor and glory, and to most of them, wealth. Imagine the number of lawyers, doctors, and businessmen who could stick to a narrow path if they knew that life offered no opportunity but drudgery and poverty. Nearly all of these look forward to the prizes of success. Most of them expect success, and many get it. For the man that I have described, a life of toil offers no chance of success. His capacity, education, and environment deny him the gambler's chance of a prize. As an honest man, he may raise a family, always be in debt, live a life of poverty and hardship, and see nothing ahead but drudgery and defeat. This is why so many mediocre men are found in the mountains and oil fields, prospecting for hidden wealth. With the chance of a fortune just before them, and no other opportunity to win, they spend their lives without a family or home, urged on by the hope of luck. The man grown from boyhood into ways of vice and crime sees this hope, and this hope only, to make a strike. He has no strong convictions and no well-settled habits to hold him back. The fear of the law only means greater caution, and after all he has nothing to lose. In his world, arrest and conviction do not mean loss of caste. They mean only bad luck. With larger numbers of men, crime becomes a trade. It grows to be a business as naturally as any other calling comes to be a trade. There are other criminals who do not come from the class I have described, but the habitual visitor to criminal courts knows that they are very few. Of the others, some are born of parents who could care for them and have done their best, and yet, in spite of this, they have repeatedly been entangled in the law. These are often the only ones of a large family who have not lived according to the rules of the game. They are different from the other members of the family. For the most part, they have some specific congenital defect, or an unstable system that prevents the correct registration of the experiences that produce safe habits, or makes them unable to withstand temptation or suggestion. Everyone knows how easy it is, especially for children, to react to suggestion. The whole life of a child is a response to suggestion. This is about all there is to education. Even older men constantly and readily yield to suggestion. The results gained by quack doctors, lightning rod agents, promoters and dealers in oil stocks, mining stocks, and an endless number of other stocks, show that the right kind of suggestion is bound to produce results. The dressing of the windows of department stores and the writing of catchy advertisements are a constant recognition of the power of suggestion. So well known is this weakness of human character that schools of salesmanship are regularly organized and promoted to teach the art of getting victims to part with money for things they do not want or need. Every right-feeling person does everything in his power to educate the child. He is ever watchful through the child's youth and early manhood to equip him with the capacity to make a living. He seeks to build up, around him and within him, the strongest kind of habits and beliefs. He carefully teaches the child that the only way to live is to observe all the rules laid down by experience and custom, so that he may not react to the temptations that life holds out at every step. Every wise person feels almost certain that if his children are reared without education, without discipline, without training or opportunities, they will almost inevitably swell the ranks of the criminal classes. And it is especially certain that if one of his children is defective or has an unstable nervous system, such a child should never be left without protection and care. There are professional criminals of a different grade, like the forger and the confidence man. Both of these have generally had some education and a fair degree of intelligence, and have had some advantages in life. The forger, as a rule, is a bookkeeper or an accountant who grows expert with the pen. He works for a small salary and sees nothing better. He grows familiar with signatures. Sometimes he is a clerk in a bank, and has the opportunity to study signatures. He begins to imitate them, often with no thought of forging paper. He does it because it is an art, and probably the only thing he can do well. Perhaps some hard luck or an unfortunate venture on the Board of Trade or in a faro bank makes him write a cheque or note. He easily convinces himself that he is not getting the salary he earns, and that less worthy men prosper while he is poor. Then, too, his business calls for better clothes and better surroundings than those of the working man, and gives him many glimpses of easy lives. For a time he may escape. If the amount is not too large, it is often passed by without an effort to detect. Sometimes it escapes notice altogether. Some businessmen write so many cheques that they take no pains at the end of the month to figure up their account and examine every cheque, and never notice it unless the balance given by the bank is so far out of the way that it attracts attention. After a forger grows to be an expert, he can move from town to town. If he is taken and put in prison and finally released, he is hard to cure. Forgery is too easy, and he knows of no other trade so good. A large percentage of these men never would have forged had their wages been higher. Many others are the victims of the get-rich-quick disease. They haunt the gambling houses, brokers' offices, and the like. Often, when they begin, they expect to make the cheque good. Generally, they would have made good if the right card had only turned up in the faro bank, or the right quotation on the stock exchange. There is another class of forgers, generally bankers, who speculate with trust funds. To cover up the shortage, they sign notes expecting that they will never be presented, and will deceive no one but the bank examiner. If luck goes against them too long, the bank fails and the forgery is discovered. These are really not forgers, as they never intend to get money on the note. It is only a part of a means to cover up the use of trust funds. Of course, these men are never professional forgers, and are much more apt to die from suicide or a broken heart than to repeat. But, with few exceptions, the criminal comes from the walks of the poor, and has no education, or next to none. For this, society is much to blame. Sometimes he is obliged to go to work too soon, but often he cannot learn at school. This is not entirely the fault of the boy's heredity, it is largely the fault of the school. A certain course of study has been laid out. With only slight changes, this course has come down from the past and is fixed and formal. Much of it might be of value to a professional man, but most of it is of no value to the man in other walks of life. Because a boy cannot learn arithmetic, grammar, or geography, or not even learn to read and write, it does not follow that he cannot learn at all. He may possibly have marked mechanical ability. He may have more than the ordinary powers of adaptation to many kinds of work. These he could be taught to do, and often to do well. Under proper instruction he might become greatly interested in some kind of work, and in the study to prepare him for the work. Then, too, it is more or less misleading to say that an uneducated man commits crime because he is uneducated. Often his lack of education, as well as his crime, comes from poverty. Crime and poverty may come from something else. All come because he had a poor make-up or an insufficient chance. After all, the great majority of men must do some kind of manual labor. Until the time shall come when this kind of work is as easy and as well paid as other employment, no one will do manual labor if he can do any other kind. Perhaps a time may come when the hardest and most disagreeable work will be the best paid. There are too many unskilled workers in proportion to the population to make this seem very near. In the meantime, and that is doubtless a long time, someone must do this work. Much of it is done under supervision and requires no great skill, and need not be very disagreeable or hard. In a complex civilization there is room for everyone to contribute to the whole. If our schools are some day what they should be, a large part of their time, in some cases all of it, will be devoted to manual training, and will be given to producing skilled workmen. This sort of school work can be made attractive to thousands of boys who can do nothing else. And if easier conditions of life, under fairer social surroundings, could be added to this kind of education, most boys who now drift into crime would doubtless find the conventional life more profitable and attractive. Chapter 8. The Female Criminal. Women furnish only 1/5 to 1/10 of the population of penal institutions. Probably the percentage would be still lower if among these were not a number of rather common convictions for acts which are peculiar to women, like abortion, infanticide, child abandonment, and the like. As to the other crimes, few women are burglars or robbers, or guilty of other crimes of violence, except murder. Women steal and poison and blackmail and extort money and lie and slander and gossip, and probably cause as much unhappiness as men. But their crimes, like their lives, are not on so large or adventurous a scale. They do not so readily take a chance. They lack the imagination that makes big criminals or lays broad schemes. In many of their crimes they are often the accomplices of men, and take rather a minor part, although sometimes a quite important one. For this reason they are often not detected, and frequently not prosecuted, a fact which leaves the percentage smaller than it otherwise would be. Then, too, juries are apt to acquit women of crime, even when they are indicted and tried. It must be a positive case, and one which calls for no possible feeling of sympathy, or where there is no personal appeal, that will work the conviction of a woman. Men have so long adopted an attitude of chivalry towards women that very few juries will convict them. This, too, has much to do with the small number of female convicts. Some writers claim that the small number of women in penal institutions shows that women are better than men, but this is a hasty conclusion, arrived at from insufficient facts. There are fewer female prisoners because women have lived a more protected life. They have not been engaged so generally in business. They have not been so constantly obliged to fight their way in the world. Their lives have been more quiet and smooth. They have been surrounded by strong conventions and closely watched. Especially is this true with regard to the girl as compared with the boy. Such protection naturally keeps them from the commission of crime. The great consideration shown to them by prosecuting witnesses, prosecuting officers, judges and juries supplements the protected life, and is an added reason for the showing made by statistics. It is notorious that a woman is seldom convicted of murder. This has been the subject of much complaint on the part of the public. Still, a man may condemn such acquittals, and when placed on a jury will himself vote for acquittal. After all, the juries are right. Most of the cases of murder against women involve sex relations. Nature has made the bearing and rearing of children first of all the woman's part, and this fact so dominates her life that nothing else seems important to her in comparison. She is not able to judge in a broad and scientific way matters so clearly affecting life. It may even be possible that in the evolution and preservation of life her judgments are right. At least they are the natural judgments for a large number of women, or these tragedies would not occur. No doubt, as woman enters the field of industry formerly monopolized by man, and as she takes her part in politics and sits on juries, the percentage of female criminals will rapidly increase. In fact, the percentage of women prisoners has been climbing for many years. As she takes her place with men, she will be more and more judged as men are judged, and will commit the crimes that men commit, and perhaps furnish her fair quota to the penitentiaries and jails. Whether this will be better or worse for the race is no part of the discussion, and can only be told by long experience. Women must accept the facts, and make their choice of activities in view of these facts. Quite apart from any sentiment, I think that it is a mistake to believe that men and women should be judged alike. The structure and nervous system of women cause physical and mental disturbances which affect their judgment and life. If there were any justice in human judgment and civilization, then each human being would be judged according to his make-up, his tendencies, his inclinations and his capacities, and no two would be judged alike. Any sudden change in the treatment of women in the courts will work a great injustice that will leave its effect on both women and men, and still more on the life of the race. Chapter 9. Juvenile Criminals. This subject would scarcely have been noted a few years ago. True, there was, in the past, a small mixture of children in the grist ground out in the criminal courts. Usually they received some leniency, and were viewed with more curiosity than alarm. The juvenile criminal was regarded as a prodigy with a capacity for crimes far beyond his years. Something of the attitude obtained in regard to him which attaches to the child chess player or the child mathematician. The child criminal is now common, and for the most part is a product of the city. All crime is doubtless much more common in the city than the country, and the young criminal especially is a product of the crowded community. To those who look for natural causes for all phenomena, the reason is not far to seek. The city itself is an abnormal thing. Primitive man and his ancestors were never huddled together in great multitudes, as are the dwellers in cities today. To a degree, almost all animals are gregarious, but the units of organization are much smaller with them than with man, excepting possibly in the case of the ant and the bee, insects which seem specially adapted to live a highly automatic and cooperative life, such as human beings cannot possibly reach. But primitive man and their direct ancestors lived in small groups. They could not have preserved their life in any other way. They lived by fishing and hunting, and by gathering roots, berries, and herbs. Later they tended their flocks and cultivated the fields in a simple way. With the introduction of the modern machine, the factory system, and the railroads in the last century, our great modern cities were evolved. As they grew more complicated, new problems arose. The life of the crowded city is most difficult even for normal men and women. The adjustments are too numerous and too complex for an animal made with simple tastes and for a pastoral life. But if it is hard for men, it is almost hopeless for children, especially the children of the poor who fill our prisons, asylums, and almshouses. Every child needs the open air and the open life of the country. He needs, first of all, exercise, which should be in the form of outdoor play. No healthy boy wants to live indoors, even though his home may be a convenient city flat. The woods, the fields, the streams, the lakes, the wide common with plenty of room, have always made their natural appeal to the young. And as sunlight kills most of the deadly germs, so outdoor life with exercise and play takes care of most of the unhealthy thoughts, habits, and ideas of child life. In the past, our schools, both in the city and country, have done little to help the young. For the most part, healthy children have always looked on them more or less as prisons. Here they have been confined and kept from exercise and play, to study useless and unrelated facts, and to commit to memory dry rules which are forgotten as soon as their minds are ready to retain anything worth while. Schools should be made to fit the needs of children, and not children to fit schools. The school that does not provide work and play for the child which he is glad to do, has learnt little of the psychology and needs of youth. Botany, zoology, geology, and even chemistry can be taught to children before they learn to read, and taught so that it will seem like play, and through this the pupil will acquire a natural taste for books. It is only within the last few years that the modern school has really begun to educate the child. It has been a hard fight that scientific teachers have waged with conventional education for the right of the child. What has been done is too recent and scattering to show material results. Nothing is so important to the child as education. The early life is the time that character is formed, habits are made, rules of conduct taught, and it is almost impossible to uproot old habits and inhibitions and implant new ones in later years. It is true that the child is father to the man, and he is the father of the criminal as well as the useful citizen. Outside of the hopelessly defective, or those who have very imperfect nervous or physical systems, there is no reason why a child who has had proper mental and physical training, and any fair opportunity in life, should ever be a criminal. Even most of the mentally defective, and those suffering from imperfect nervous systems, could be useful to society in a sheltered environment. Poor as the country schools have always been, the outdoor life of the country child is still so great an influence that he generally escapes disaster. He is not sent to a factory, but lives in a small community where he has fresh air and exercise. Of course, here as everywhere we must allow for the defective, the imperfect, the subnormals, and the children of the very poor. These unfortunates furnish a large percentage of the inmates of prison, and most of the victims for the scaffold which civilization so fondly preserves. The growth of the big cities has produced the child criminal. He is clearly marked and well defined. He is often subnormal even down to idiocy. In most cases he is the result of heredity. Many times he may have fair intelligence, but this is usually attached to an unstable, defective nervous system that cannot do its proper work, and he has had no expert treatment and attention. He is always poor. Generally he has lost one or both parents in youth, and has lived in the crowded districts where the home was congested. He has no adequate playground, and he runs the streets or vacant waste places. He associates and combines with others of his kind. He cannot or does not go to school. If he goes to school he dreads to go, and cannot learn the lessons in the books. He likes to loaf, just as all children like to play. He is often set to work. He has no trade, and little capacity for skilled work that brings good wages and steady employment. He works no more than he needs to work. Every night and all the days that he can get are spent in idleness on the street with his gang. He seldom reads books. He lacks the taste for books, and such teachers as he knew had not the wit to cultivate a taste for good reading. Such books as he gets only add to his unhealthy thoughts. Many writers have classified the crimes that the boy commits. It is scarcely worth the while. He learns to steal or becomes a burglar, largely for the love of adventure. He robs because it is exciting and may bring large returns. In his excursions to pilfer property, he may kill, and then, for the first time, the state discovers that there is such a boy, and sets in action the machinery to take his life. The city, quite probably, has given him a casual notice by arresting him a number of times and sending him to a juvenile prison, but it has rarely extended a hand to help him. Any man or woman who has fairly normal faculties and can reason from cause to effect knows that the crimes of children are really the crimes of the state and society, which by neglect and active participation have made him what he is. When it is remembered that the man is the child grown up, it is equally easy to understand the adult prisoner. Chapter 10. Homicide. Crimes against persons are not always as easy to classify and understand as crimes against property. These acts are so numerous and come from so many different emotions and motives that often the cause is obscure and the explanation not easy to find. Still, here, as everywhere in nature, nothing can happen without a cause, and even where limited knowledge does its best and cannot find causes, our recognition of the connection between cause and effect and the overall inclusiveness of law can leave no doubt that complete knowledge would bring complete understanding. It is always to be borne in mind in considering this class of crimes that the motive power of life is not reason but instinct. If men lived by reason, the race would not survive. The primal things that preserve the race, the hunger for food, drink, sex, are instinctive, and not only are not awakened or satisfied by reason, but oftentimes in violation of it. Nature, first of all, sees to the preservation of the species, and acts in a broad way that life may not perish. Nature knows nothing about right and wrong in the sense in which man uses these words. All of our moral conceptions are purely of social origin, and hence not instinctive in human life, and are forever giving way to the instincts on which nature depends. The preservation of life has called for the emotions of hate, fear, and love, among the other emotions that move men. The animal fears danger and runs away, and thus life is preserved. The weaker animal is almost entirely dependent for life upon his fear. He is sometimes afraid when there is no danger, but without fear he would be destroyed. Sometimes the animal hates and kills, and thus preserves himself. The love of offspring is the cause of the care bestowed upon it, which preserves its life. The herd instinct in animal species develops packs and clans and tribes and states. Man is the heir to all the past, and the instincts and emotions of the primitive animal are strong in his being. These may have been strengthened or diluted as the ages have come and gone, but the same instincts furnish the motive power for all his acts. Man fears and hates, and runs or kills and saves his life. He loves and preserves his offspring. Man sees an object. Instinctively he may fear it or he may hate it. He may run from it or destroy it. He gathers impressions through his senses. The nerves carry them to the brain. He comes to fear certain persons and things, to hate certain other persons or things, and to love still others. If the hatred is strong enough, or the danger great enough, or the desire sufficient, he may kill. Whether he plans the method or deliberates upon the act can make no difference. He is prompted by the instinct, and the reflection simply means the consideration of reasons for and against, or the reaching of inhibitions. If he acts, it is one of the primal emotions that causes the act. He is the machine through which certain emotions find their path and do their work. Infinite are the causes and circumstances that give rise to an emotion strong enough to take human life. Killings which result from a sudden passion are easily understood. Everyone has been overwhelmed by rage, where reason and judgment and all acquired restraints are entirely submerged. The primitive man with his primitive emotion reasserts himself. It is mainly accident or the lack of some particular circumstance that prevents a murder. Of course, some people are overwhelmed more easily than others. Some natures are less stable, some nervous systems less perfect, and the built-up barriers are weaker. The whole result of stimuli is determined by the strength of the feeling acting upon the machine. Such a person is not ordinarily dangerous to the community. The act itself would generally assure that it could never happen again. Some killings, however, are more deliberate. They are preceded by a settled hatred which preys upon the mind and fights against the preventive influences that training and habit have formed. Under a certain combination of circumstances, these restrictions are swept aside, and the emotions have their way. There are, of course, certain broad classifications of homicides. A considerable number, perhaps more than any other, come through the commission of robbery, burglary, and larceny. In the midst of the act, the offender is caught and kills in an effort to escape. These murders fall under the heading of property crimes. The cause is the same, and the rules governing them are the same. The second group, with respect to numbers, grows from the relations of men and women. Wives kill husbands, and husbands kill wives. Sweethearts kill each other. Jealousy and revenge are commonly mixed with sex life and sex association. Many socialists have argued that under an equal distribution of property, where women were freed from fear of want, these crimes would disappear. But this argument does not take human nature into account. Jealousy is inevitably associated with sex relations. The close contact of men and women over long periods of time inevitably causes friction and misunderstanding. These conditions often grow chronic, and in marriage are aggravated by the necessity of close association regardless of the real feelings that may exist. Certain claims are made by husbands and by wives which are probably inherent in the relationship. Sometimes they flow from habit and custom, but from whatever cause, such claims are so exacting that either the husband or wife finds them hard to meet. Because of the fact that the feelings of men and women for each other are deeper and more fundamental than those of any other relation, they are more subject to misfortune and tragedy. The hatreds born from the deepest affection are most beyond control. Then the desire of possession is overwhelming. It would be strange if more killings did not result from the relations of men and women than from any other cause. It is easy to understand why this is true. It is likewise easy to understand how laws, reason, and judgment are powerless to prevent. Juries seem to understand this when women kill husbands and lovers, but a long-established code of chivalry and a cultivated attitude towards women, which is partly right and partly wrong, makes it impossible to see that men are just as helpless under strong feelings as women. No doubt a public opinion that would favor divorces on a greater number of grounds, and make them easily obtainable, would prevent large numbers of such killings, but the cause cannot be altogether removed. The law has long singled out killing as the greatest crime, doubtless because man prizes life first of all. Of course, every effort should be made to protect life. Still, in measuring the character of the offender, in determining his possibilities as a useful citizen, homicide is probably one of the lesser crimes. Many times it implies no moral turpitude, even with those who believe in moral turpitude. It may imply very little lack of physical stability. Homicide practically never becomes an occupation. Most killings are accidental, in the sense that they are casual and dependent on circumstances, and there is, as a rule, much less danger of repetition than there is of the original commission of a homicide by one of a defective nervous system who has never before committed an unlawful act. A large number of men convicted of murder are used as trustees in our penal institutions, even when their imprisonment is for a long term or for life. This shows, from the experience of prison officials, that this class of offenders is, as a rule, of a better fibre than almost any other class. Doubtless no sort of treatment will ever entirely get rid of homicide. Brains and nervous systems are so made that inhibitions are unable to protect in all cases. Nations and men readily engage in killing, either from sport or because of a real or fancied wrong. Mob psychology shows how whole communities are turned into ravenous beasts, hunting for their prey. The World War, and all wars, show cases of mob psychology that have led large masses of men to take an active part in killing. The pursuit of those charged with crime shows that all people like the chase when the emotions are thoroughly aroused. Under certain impulses, communities gloat over hangings and commend judges and juries because they have the courage to hang, when in fact they were too cowardly not to hang, and when their reason did not approve the verdict and judgment. Men who do not kill often wish others might die, and are pleased and happy when they do die. We approve of death when it is the right one who dies. Whether all persons are murderers or not may depend upon a definition of murder, but beyond doubt all persons are potential murderers, needing only time and circumstances, and a sufficiently overwhelming emotion that will triumph over the weak restraints that education and habit have built up to control the powerful surging instincts and feelings that nature has laid at the foundations of life. Chapter 11. Sex Crimes. Most of the inmates of prisons convicted of sex crimes are the poor and wretched and the plainly defective. Nature, in her determination to preserve the species, has planted sex hunger very deep in the constitution of man. The fact that it is necessary for the preservation of life, and that nature is always eliminating those whose sex hunger is not strong enough to preserve the race, has overweighted man, and perhaps all animal life, with this hunger. At least it has endowed many men with instincts too powerful for the conventions and the laws that hedge him about. Rape is almost always the crime of the poor, the hard-working, the uneducated, and the abnormal. In the man of this type, sex hunger is strong. He has little money, generally no family. He is poorly fed and clothed, and possesses few, if any, attractions. He may be a sailor, away from women and their society for months, or in some other remote occupation, making his means of gratifying this hunger just as impossible. There is no opportunity for him except the one he adopts. It is a question of gratifying this deep and primal instinct as against the weakness of his mentality and the few barriers that a meagre education and picked-up habits can furnish, and when the instinct overbalances, he is lost. Incest, which is peculiarly the crime of the weak, the wretched, and the poor, has a somewhat different origin. Westermarck, in his History of Human Marriage, shows that in the early tribe there was no inhibition against the marriage of blood relations, that the restriction then was against the members of the tribe that used one tent. These might or might not be blood relations. The traditions and folk-ways against the marriage of close relations grew from the familiarity that came from the living together of brother and sister, for instance, in one home. This feeling gradually worked itself into custom and habit, and from that into folk ways and laws. Sometimes we read accounts of the marriage of a man and woman who found after years had gone by that they were brother and sister, who had been separated in infancy and grew up without knowledge of their relation to each other. Whether nature forbids the marriage of relatives by preventing offspring, or by producing imperfect offspring, is a doubtful question. Certain communities in Europe have lived together so long that all are related, and still they seem to thrive. Considering the general custom and feeling on the subject, however, the man and woman who know that they are closely related, and who marry, are different and weaker than the others, and this may show in their offspring. Although the subnormal may have no such feeling, they are judged by the traditions and customs of the normal, and on that judgment are sent to prison. Many sex crimes are charged to children in the adolescent age, children who have no knowledge of sex and its development, and are helpless in the strength of their newly discovered feelings. This class of offenders is almost always the inferior and the poor, who are moved by strong instincts which they have not the natural feeling, the strength, the education, nor the desire to withstand. While most crimes against persons are not directly due to economic causes, still the indirect effect of property is generally present in these crimes as well as others. The fact that the poor and defective are generally the subjects of prosecution and conviction in these offences shows how closely economic conditions are related to all crimes. Other criminal statutes are of more modern date, and as a rule involve not much more than adultery, except in regard to the age of the girl offender, which is generally placed below 18. Still, the sex age of neither boys nor girls can be fixed by a calendar. It depends really upon development, which is not the same with all people or in all environments. Many girls of 16 are more mature and have more experience of life than others of 20. Most laws provide that below 16 one cannot give consent, and that a sexual act is then rape. It is doubtful if there should be any intermediate age between 16 and 18 where an act is not rape, but still a minor offence. Chapter 12. Robbery and Burglary. Robbery and burglary are generally counted as crimes of violence, but they should be properly classed under property crimes. Every motive that leads to getting property in illegal ways applies to these crimes. There is added to the regular causes of property crimes the element of danger and adventure, which makes a strong appeal to boys and men. I am inclined to think that few mature men have committed one of these crimes unless they began criminal careers as boys. Such crimes especially appeal to the activity and love of adventure which inhere in every boy. They are committed for the most part by youths who have had almost no chance to get the needed sport and physical experience incident to boyhood. The football, baseball, polo, or golf player very seldom becomes a robber or a burglar. Almost no rich man or rich man's son becomes a robber or a burglar. Those who fall under this lure are mainly the denizens of the streets, the railroad yards, the vacant lots, the casual workers who are stimulated by a variety of conditions to get property unlawfully. Added to this are almost invariably a defective heredity, vicious environment, little education, and a total want of direction in the building up of habits and inhibitions. The robber or burglar who kills in the commission of crime is more dangerous and harder to cure than the one who kills from passion or malice. There is always the element of an occupation for getting property, and generally a love of adventure that is difficult to overcome, except by a substantial change of social relations, which makes acquiring property easier for the class from which all these criminals develop. The murder that comes from passion and feeling implies situations and circumstances that are rarely strong enough to overcome the restrictions against killing.